瓷器是历史的见证，是最日常的器物，也是人类最了不起的黑科技。
Hello and welcome to the next of these podcasts, My Stories of Chinese Porcelain. I am Tu Ming, a craftsman and writer on Chinese porcelain based in Qingduashen, China, known as the Porcelain Capital. I hope you're enjoying hearing my podcasts about porcelain. In this episode, let's talk about the 72 processes of making porcelain. I remember there was an article in my school textbook called The Lion Sculptures on the Marco Polo Bridge. I cannot recall the details of the story, but one thing I do remember is that there are lots of different lion sculptures on the bridge. Out of curiosity, when I visit tourist attractions and pass by bridges, especially the ancient ones, I always pay attention to find out whether there are sculptures on them, and quite often I do see them, and most of the time the sculptures are lions. But you know what? The bridge linking Qingduashen's downtown area is very special. The sculptures on the bridge are not lions. They are miniature people, all with different gestures, and no two are the same. If you look closely, you will realize that those people are craftsmen at work making porcelain. Because there are so many procedures in the porcelain making process, every person has a different look and posture. In the Qingduashen Chinese Porcelain Museum, you can see the full set of sculptures describing the procedures of the complete process of porcelain making. When you count up, you will see there are 72 of them. Normal craft trades like weaving, blacksmithing or carpentry usually happened in a small workshop with simple procedures. So why does porcelain making involve so many procedures? I talked about the main 4 procedures for making blue and white porcelain in a previous podcast, but as I have indicated now, there are actually 72 procedures for making a piece of porcelain. How do we know it takes 72 procedures, and where is the official record? In the 17th century, a Chinese scientist in the Ming dynasty published a technology encyclopedia called Tiangong Kaiwu, or The Exploitation of the Works of Nature. In that book is recorded and analysed lots of agricultural and industrial production technologies, including porcelain making. It says, "From the clay to the final porcelain, it passes 72 pairs of hands in the making." The book goes on to explain the whole process. That is a good summary of the 72 procedures. But it would not be accurate to say that passing through 72 pairs of hands is the same as having 72 procedures, is it? Indeed, in the book it did not recall all 72 processes, but just mentioned the major steps. Obviously, when you make multicoloured porcelain, the procedures would be more than for the blue and white porcelain. The multicoloured porcelain needs more work at the colouring stage, and twice the number of firings. Also, the procedures involved in making a porcelain sculpture or animal figures would be much more complicated than making a plate or a bowl. So I would say more or less around 72 processes would be the case. Let's look at how detailed it is for the porcelain making process. We talked about the painting stage as one of the 4 main processes in blue and white porcelain making. And you may think that there would be one painter who would paint the patterns onto the body when it was time. But in fact, each painter would only be specialised in each theme, like a plant, leaves, birds, human figures, scenery, special patterns and so forth. A complicated element may also use different painters for more detailed painting functions. So one may just paint the body of the dragon, whilst another will paint the surroundings, the profile and the shade. That means a piece of porcelain with different patterns will involve a few different painters to produce it. When it comes to multicoloured porcelain, it's even more complicated and involves more painters and more procedures. To have good colouring, the porcelain would be fired at least twice to coat it in different colours and to glaze it. And this is just for the painting stage. When making sophisticated porcelain, the processes from clay and body making, the glazing and the firing, these would be much more complicated, highly specialised and segmented. So, the old Chinese book, The Exploitation of Works and Nature, has given us the impression that the clay dough was being passed on from one pair of hands to another until it turned into the final porcelain product. In that sense, the Chinese porcelain industry can be said to have established the oldest assembly line for centuries. Throughout Chinese history, many different craft trades and skills flourished. For example, gold and silverware smithing, silk production, furniture making, jade sculpturing, and porcelain's sister industry of purple sandpot making. Normally these just involve a master or a handful of skilled workers in the making, and the skills were passed on through families. Purple sandpots are very popular among Chinese tea drinkers, and making them normally just involves one craftsman. Historically, only Qingdua Shen's porcelain making process involved so many hands and procedures. Why is that? The answer is the economy of scale. The Book of the Exploitation of Works and Nature was published in 1637. It was in the late Ming dynasty. At that time, Qingdua Shen was not only supplying the Chinese domestic market, but also the demands of the worldwide export market. There were other kilns in China at that time, but they were all scattered across inland China, with only a small production capacity. Qingdua Shen was not too far away from Canton, and it was linked to Canton's port by the river system. By then, the whole city was a giant firing kiln, with all the kilns running day and night to supply the whole world. Just like modern industry, detailed segmentation of the process enabled mass production to meet the huge demands. It was a virtuous circle for Qingdua Shen's porcelain-making industry. The simpler and more repetitive the task is, the easier and quicker it is for the worker to do it. The quicker the product is finished, then the lower the costs, and the larger the output volume. Modern industry's economies of scale was perfectly applied to Qingdua Shen's porcelain industry from the 1100s, the Sung and Yuan dynasties. But modern industrialization is a double-edged sword. It did make Qingdua Shen the largest porcelain maker for centuries, but it also caused its decline over the last century. In my next and last episode, I will talk about the challenges the Chinese have experienced in the modern era. I hope you'll join me for the conclusion of this story of porcelain. Until then, goodbye. This has been a China Plus podcast. Original Chinese reading was by Sanliang Zhongdu, with English translation by Graham Stevens. If you like the show, please give us a rating and subscribe to us wherever you listen. If you've got any questions or feedback, please feel free to contact us via email at podcast@cri.com.cn or on Twitter at #ChinaPlusPods.